Hi students, we're beginning on a new chapter and we're getting into the Civil War, and there's a lot of things that you're going to find out from the chapter by reading and that, but I wanted to go through the first section of this preparing for the Civil War, the country getting ready for the Civil War, and point out some interesting things that you might not have picked up on in your reading. So I'm not going to go through all the political views and who thought what and who did what and that. Those are facts you can get from your book. And the things I'm going to tell you today are in your book also, but they're kind of the interesting things to point out. And the first thing is I wanted to mention Zachary Taylor. Zachary Taylor isn't really a well-known president. I'm not real sure anything about what he accomplished, what he didn't accomplish. But the thing about Zachary Taylor was he did own slaves. But nobody knew his political views. Nobody knew whether he thought slavery was immoral, slavery was a sin, slavery was anti the United States government, any of those things about slaves. He was not political. He didn't express his political views at all. The amazing thing is, Zachary Taylor never voted in a presidential election. Now, we're talking about the 1840s here, where the country is close to 100 years old, 75 years old, and Zachary Taylor has never voted in a political election, in a presidential election, but he became President of the United States, having never ever voted for anyone else. I think that's just amazing. I can't imagine that happening today, but maybe. Okay, the next person is John Sutter. Now, John Sutter was a Swiss immigrant, and he immigrated to California when California was under Mexican control. He wanted to build a ranch, and he was deeded 50,000 acres from the Mexican government on which to build his ranch. He worked on his ranch. He started building under the Mexican government, and everything is going okay. And then California comes under U.S. control. Now, so he went through the Mexican War there in California. U.S. control didn't stop him much. It didn't harm him, other than in 1848, Sutter was building a sawmill. And he wanted to build a sawmill because he needed outbuildings and things for his ranch that he was building, maybe fence posts, that kind of thing. So he's building a sawmill, which requires him to build on a creek running water. And on this creek, one of his workers found gold in the creek below the sawmill, below the water wheel. Well, this news broke out and spread across the country, and all of a sudden, 80,000 men are coming to California to seek gold, because gold is a precious commodity. And they knew it at that time. They knew they could be wealthy. They're coming strictly for gold. In the next 10 years, over 400,000 more men came, which caused a lot of conflict in California. The government wasn't prepared for it. The existing laws weren't prepared for that influx of men, and the men were greedy and probably not very lawful in it. These men who came to California had sold everything. They had given everything up. They had given up their homes. They had given up their businesses. Some had given up wives and families to travel to California to get gold, to become rich. Most of them who came lost everything. The amazing thing is that in this, John Sutter, with 50,000 acres, who discovered the gold, lost everything too. He lost his land to these greedy settlers that came in looking for gold, and he eventually died penniless in Pennsylvania. Okay. That's just another interesting story out of this chapter. And when I was in California one time helping the company that I was working for build a motel, I was kind of the project manager on this building, and I kept hearing this song on the radio, which is Gold in California. So I'm going to read a verse to you. It's actually the chorus. All the gold in California is in the bank in the middle of Beverly Hills in somebody else's name. So if you're dreaming about California, it don't matter at all where you've played before. California is a brand new game. Just an interesting tidbit about gold in California. Okay, the last thing I want to go over is the Underground Railroad. And I know you've all heard of it, and you've probably heard some names associated with it. But to explain it a little bit, the Underground Railroad was a series of safe houses called stations or depots. The safe houses were overseen by a conductor, and the fugitives, the slave fugitives, were called passengers. And people in these safe houses helped the slaves, fed them and sent them to the next safe house for hiding, for more food, a source of living. So these passengers, these slaves, are going from safe house to safe house until they make it to the northern states where they are free. The most well-known conductor was Harriet Tubman. She was originally a slave, and she escaped to freedom, and she came back to help other slaves escape to freedom. And she helped thousands, over a few thousands of slaves to escape. Amazing thing about Harriet Tubman, this year, in the year 2020, the U.S. Treasury Department has decided to place Harriet Tubman's picture on the new $20 bills that will be printed this year. The first woman on a bill of United States currency, her picture will replace Andrew Jackson. Other slaves were inventive in their methods of escape too. Now many of them were caught, but a couple of instances of escape was a husband and wife. The wife was light-skinned and could pass for white, so she disguised herself as an old woman who was traveling with her loyal slave. Her loyal slave was her husband. Women could travel with loyal slaves, could travel with slaves into the north on railroads, on any means. And so she disguised herself, and her husband played the part of her loyal slave, and together they got to the north and escaped slavery in the south. Another slave, at great peril of his life, which all of them were when they were escaping this, had a carpenter build him a crate. And he put himself in the crate, and they nailed it shut, and he mailed himself to Philadelphia and freedom and made it. Thousands escaped, but the many thousands that were in existence still were slaves. The number of slaves that escaped were not anywhere near comparable to the slaves that still existed in the South. one of the terrible periods of our U.S. history. And that's it for today.